Hello, thank you for joining us. My name is Victoria Young, I'm the brand manager for Innovos, and I'm here today with Liz Waters, consultant nurse. And we're going to be giving you a bit of an interview to sort of find out a little bit more about Liz and her background. So yeah, let's get started. So Liz, first of all, can you just tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah, I was born in Newport in South Wales, and I disappeared up to Oxford when I was 18 to do my nurse training, and lived and worked there for 16 years. And it was a great time of my life, I have to say. I had children, and of course you need to be near mum and dad, don't you, when you have children. So I returned back to my native South Wales, and I now live in Crickhowell. On return to South Wales, I worked for an Iron Bevan Health Board. Loved every minute of it. Very, very busy, and the past 22 years have been in infection prevention and control. Fascinating journey.
Yeah, I could imagine.
Yes.
Okay, great. And obviously you're here today working with Innovos. So can you tell us how you first came across us?
Well, that's quite an interesting story. Anybody in the infection prevention and control world will understand the journey we've all been on in terms of healthcare associated infection. And back in around 2010, 2011, our health board, like many other health boards and trusts across the UK, were having particular problems with C. difficile. And the lead infection control doctor I worked with at the time, Dr. Neil Carbons, suggested that we looked at hydrogen peroxide vapour as a means to controlling C. diff spores in the environment. I got hold of a company called Innovos, and we had our first ward deep clean in 2010. We had 10 cases of C. diff in 10 days, and the ward deep clean stopped it in its tracks. I was hooked from that moment onwards, and I've worked closely with Innovos ever since to implement proactive and reactive deep cleans across an Iron Bevan Health Board. I should point out I am now retired from an Iron Bevan Health Board, so I certainly hope that the strategy will continue.
Yeah, I'm sure with all the advice you've given over the years, they should be in safe hands.
Hopefully so.
Thank you. And let's talk a little bit more about your time working in the NHS. So obviously it's been under quite a lot of pressure over the last few years, but before we kind of go into anything too problematic, can we hear about your best memory working in the NHS?
My best memory actually doesn't have anything to do with infection control. It was while I was working on an orthopaedic ward, and it was a quiet, yes, don't laugh, but it was a quiet Sunday morning, and I was responsible for looking after a bay of middle-aged men who had hip and knee replacements, and they were 3 or 4 days post-op, and so they were well on the way to sort of getting up and ready to go home. So they were all behind the curtains having a wash, and I don't know how we got onto the conversation, but it was about the music of the Dam Busters and how we often get it mixed up with the Battle of Britain film, which the name of which escapes me, because it all sounded so similar. And within 5 minutes, I had the whole of the bay singing both tunes, the theme music to both the films. It was absolutely hilarious. And then, of course, we got on to the theme music of The Magnificent Seven and The Big Country. And again, there was huge arguments about which one belonged to which. But it was such a lovely, lovely morning, and we laughed and laughed and laughed. It was great. That's my fondest memory of the NHS at a time when, you know, we did used to have quiet Sunday mornings.
Oh, how nice.
Yeah.
I'm sure people would like to know what that's like.
Yes, I think they would nowadays. Yeah. And it's a shame that we don't have those mornings anymore.
Yeah. Maybe one day we'll get back to them.
Absolutely.
Maybe a bit hopeful.
Yeah.
So can you tell us about some of the challenges that you faced when you were sort of working within an IPC team?
Well, I think I've come across every pathogen under the sun, really. The ones of note, of course, are MRSA. I was appointed to my first infection prevention and control post in April 1999, and in the summer, MRSA kicked off big time in the media, and I did wonder what I'd let myself in for. So MRSA was the focus of our attention for a number of years, followed by C. diff. We had to prepare for Ebola at one point, which was particularly scary, I have to say, swine flu, and of course COVID, amongst a plethora of other pathogens that infection prevention and control teams deal with on a daily basis. I remember there's Denatrophomonas outbreak that we had on our intensive care unit, and we traced it back to the water cooler. I have a million and one stories about all sorts of pathogens that I've had to deal with over the past 22 years. And I think what strikes me in infection prevention and control is the number of plates that you have to keep spinning, as one very wise executive director of nursing once said to me.
Wow, yeah. Yeah, it's definitely not an easy job, is it?
It's not. It is a real challenge to keep all those different plates spinning, particularly when there are huge operational pressures.
Can you give us maybe one example of a particular challenge that you faced and how you overcame it?
Well, we've talked about the C. difficile outbreak that we had back in 2010. Whilst the deep clean did what it needed to do, the C. diff issue was quite extensive, as it was across the UK at the time. Innovos was particularly helpful to me during that period of time because they were showing me areas around the country that had got this under control. Addenbrooke's being one of them, and Royal Wolverhampton, and I am particularly grateful to the teams in both those trusts for allowing me to visit them and to see what they were doing. Addenbrooke's, it struck me how efficient they were at undertaking decant deep cleans. They were fortunate enough back in those days to be putting a ward through a 3-monthly programme of deep cleans, which was phenomenal. Royal Wolverhampton was of particular interest because I happened to visit them at the time they were having an infection control committee meeting, and I was just so impressed with the level of ownership that particular organisation had in terms of their infection control arrangements. The meeting was well attended. It was chaired by the chief executive. There were medical consultants, standing up and owning their problem, talking about the numbers of C. diff they'd had, what their antibiotic policies were like, what their hand hygiene scores were, what their cleanliness scores were, and they would throw in a case of MRSA bacteremia to get that sorted too. I was just so impressed with the level of ownership, and it was something that I took back to my organisation. And an Iron Bevan Health Board also picked up on this, and we had a fantastic C. difficile champions group, which really helped to significantly reduce the number of cases that we had.
Amazing. So how was it when you, obviously after your visit to Addenbrooke's and to Wolverhampton, you came back and did you have to present a proposal?
I did. I had to write a paper for the executive team. The paper picked up on the ownership issues. It picked up on the cleanliness issues, and I also proposed a summer program of deep cleans. using hydrogen peroxide vapour. Again, Innovos were just really helpful in making that happen once it was agreed by the executive team. What we found was that by introducing a summer programme of cleans, it prevented ward closures for C. diff over the winter months when things were really difficult. What we also found was that it's important to do full ward deep cleans where you possibly can. I think it really strikes me that most of us will undertake a spring clean of our own houses, and yet we weren't doing that in the NHS. When you consider the evidence around environmental contamination, it's frankly astonishing that we're perhaps not as proactive in making sure that wards undergo those deep cleans at least on an annual basis.
So what do you think the most pressing issue is that infection prevention and control teams will face today?
Well, clearly COVID has been a serious challenge. Unsurprisingly, it means that our focus has turned towards the prevention of COVID transmission, meaning that some of the fantastic work that all teams did prior to COVID has probably gone on the back burner. The biggest challenge for infection prevention and control teams is getting those interventions on the front burner again, whilst also spinning the COVID plate. I have no doubt that it's extremely challenging, but with focus, I'm sure that teams can get there. And again, it takes me back to the ward deep cleans. We, in terms of preventing C. diff in particular, we have to rely on good antibiotic prescribing, high rates of hand hygiene, good standards of nursing and domestic cleanliness. So basically we're relying on human factors at a time when trusts and health boards are under unprecedented pressure. By putting deep cleans into place using hydrogen peroxide or UV, we are actually mitigating the risks associated with human factors. What's not to like about that? If we're removing the C. diff spores from the environment, then patients can't ingest them. So if antibiotics haven't been prescribed correctly, then infection will not appear because the C. diff spores are not in the environment. COVID is clearly a huge challenge and a plate that we're going to have to continue spinning, unfortunately. That said, there is evidence emerging all the time about how we can reduce the risk of respiratory infection, including COVID, through decent ventilation systems. I have no doubt that the new hospitals that are being built at this moment in time are incorporating state-of-the-art ventilation systems, but there is an absolute need to focus on old estate across the UK. What's not to like about preventing respiratory infections from patients to staff or staff to patients, when you consider that you're likely to reduce sickness and absence from staff acquisition and of course protect patients from respiratory infections too. So it would be great to have a huge focus on adequately ventilating hospitals across the country.
Yeah, I agree, and I think there's been a lot more that has been done to sort of improve the education aspect of this as well, and I think that the technology is picking up, it's there as well now to support with that, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And I have to say that companies have stepped up to the mark very, very quickly on this one. It's really good news.
Quite good to see a little bit of help coming in.
Absolutely.
So over the next 10 years, what improvements would you like to see for IPC within the NHS?
Well, as we previously discussed, it would be fantastic to see ventilation improved across all healthcare premises across the UK, not just healthcare premises, but schools and other public buildings as well. Additionally, we really should be in a position where hospitals are undergoing proper ward decant, deep cleans. The benefits of them are just too numerous to mention, as well as reducing hospital-acquired infections. You have an opportunity to fix all those holes in the walls, to do the maintenance, to fix the floor, to get the ward repainted, to unzip all those mattresses, check for contamination, check all the old furniture out that's not fit for purpose anymore. Again, what's not to like about that? As an NHS, I think we really do have to get to grips with these kind of deep clean programs, and it's certainly evident through talking to colleagues in Australia and the USA that these kind of programs are pretty usual.
Okay. And do you think that it's possible to achieve this within the next 10 years?
Absolutely. I think it needs strategic focus. It needs sign up from board to ward. You have to get your executive teams engaged and upfront in making this happen. It's difficult. I understand the operational pressures that are out there, but it is possible to literally fly in an empty decant ward onto a car park on NHS premises and to make those deep cleans happen. And apologies for those who struggle to park their cars. But this is important.
Yeah, definitely. Do you have any sort of practical tips and advice to help healthcare workers at the moment that are struggling, to help them to achieve these sorts of things?
It's a real struggle out there at the moment. I fully understand that. But we did such fantastic work pre-COVID, and it's really refocusing our mind to get back on board with those valuable interventions that we all put in place. I'm not just talking about infection prevention and control teams, I'm talking about every healthcare worker. It really is a time to double down and refocus on those crucial interventions. And I understand that that's not easy with the pressures that the NHS is under at the moment. But this is a patient safety issue. Patients die from healthcare associated infection. We have to refocus our efforts again.
Okay. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
That was everything that I've got in for today. So thank you very much for joining us and for listening. I hope you enjoyed it.
Thank you.
If you have any questions for Liz or for us at Innovos, please get in touch by sending an email to marketing@innovos.com and we will be sure to come back to you. Thanks for listening and see you next time.